Okay, let's unpack this. Every single day, you are navigating just this flood of information, headlines, social media, news alerts. It's a lot.
It really is.
Often it feels like just a stream of disconnected events. That's why we're here. In this deep dive, we've taken a recent YouTube video transcript covering some, well, incredibly recent geopolitical developments. And our mission is really to cut through that noise.
Right, to connect the dots.
Exactly. We're going to extract the critical nuggets, connect these seemingly disparate events, from the conflict in Ukraine to the NATO summit, the Iranian nuclear program, and the ongoing situation in Gaza.
We'll pull out the core insights and maybe some of those surprising details to help you quickly grasp this really interconnected global landscape.
Yeah, because it's so easy to get lost in just the sheer volume of daily news, isn't it?
Absolutely. Our goal is to help you see beyond just the individual headlines, connect those dots, and understand the deeper currents that are, shaping global affairs right now.
Precisely. And when we talk about underlying currents, there's probably no better place to start than the shifting front lines in Ukraine. The last, 24 to 48 hours have seen a pretty significant escalation.
Definitely. Ukraine launched a series of drone attacks deep into Russian territory.
A series, yeah.
That's right. Moscow described it exactly like that, a series of attacks. And Russia's Ministry of Defense reported that, get this, 40 Ukrainian drones were destroyed overnight.
40? That's a huge number.
It is. These targeted regions in southern Russia and also the Crimean Peninsula.
Okay. And the impacts were quite specific, right? Particularly in the Rostov region.
Yes, in Rostov, which borders Ukraine. Governor Ori Silar confirmed that even though 7 drones were shot down over the city of Taganrog, there was still, quote, considerable damage.
Right. I saw reports of a sports complex hit.
A sports complex hit and caught fire, yeah. A school was damaged and 2 other buildings were impacted as well.
But thankfully, no injuries reported there.
Thankfully, no injuries reported in Taganrog. But even without injuries, the infrastructure damage really speaks to the scale of these attacks.
And it wasn't just Taganrog, was it?
No, further in Rostov, in the city of Azov, a grain warehouse and an industrial facility were also damaged. So it highlights the sort of expanding geographical reach.
And then there's this intriguing, unconfirmed detail that popped up.
You mean the Telegram channels?
Yeah, speculation on both Russian and Ukrainian channels suggesting a drone might have hit a company called Atlanteo in Taganrog, a company that actually specializes in drones.
Right. Now, that hasn't been officially confirmed, so we need to be careful there. But it's certainly a detail that, it makes you think about the targeting strategy, doesn't it?
It really does. And what's the context here? This wasn't happening in a vacuum.
No, absolutely not. What's really important to remember is that these Ukrainian attacks followed a, quote, heavy Russian attack on Ukraine just the previous day.
Okay.
And that Russian attack tragically resulted in 17 fatalities in the southeast of the country.
17?
Yeah.
Wow. So this constant back and forth just illustrates the intense, reactive nature of this conflict.
Exactly. It's tit for tat, escalating cycles.
And on Russia's side, they're not just defending, they're claiming advances too.
That's correct. According to an official Russian Ministry of Defense report, their troops, quote, advanced and took control of the community of Yalta in the Donetsk region.
Yalta and Donetsk, okay. Not the Crimean Yalta.
Precisely. This was attributed to units of their East Group.
And during this operation, they claimed some significant hits on Ukrainian assets.
They did. They claimed to have destroyed a Ukrainian S-300 PT air defense system, a P-18 radar, and a command vehicle.
So going after defensive capabilities and command structures.
Right. It indicates a focus not just on, taking territory, but also on degrading Ukraine's military assets and their ability to operate effectively.
And they didn't stop there, did they? There were reports of attacks on industry, too.
Yes. They also reported attacks on Ukrainian military industry structures, drone production workshops specifically.
Drone workshops, okay.
Yeah.
Tying back to that earlier point.
Exactly. And even a fuel terminal used for troop supply in Donbas.
Yeah.
Plus, they mentioned hitting temporary positions of Ukrainian troops and foreign combatants in over 130 different locations.
Over 130 locations. That's extensive. So bringing all these pieces together, the drone strikes deep into Russia, the counterclaims of advances, the specific targeting of military assets and industry, even the unconfirmed hits. What's the most crucial takeaway for understanding how this conflict is actually being fought right now?
Well, what's really emerging, I think, is a conflict where the battlefield extends far beyond just physical territory. Both sides are clearly escalating their targeting of critical infrastructure, absolutely.
Right.
But equally, maybe even more importantly, they're engaged in a really sophisticated information war. Every reported gain, every strike, even the unconfirmed ones like the Atlanta rumor, it's all a strategic communication tool. It's designed to shape narratives, both domestically and internationally. It just underscores that, winning hearts and minds, controlling the flow of information is perhaps as vital as any territorial advance in modern warfare.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And those pressures we're seeing on the front lines in Ukraine, they inevitably ripple outwards, don't they? Affecting strategic calculations for alliances like NATO.
Absolutely. Which brings us nicely to the recent NATO summit in The Hague.
Right, where defense spending seems to have been a major, maybe even the major topic.
Indeed it was. The 32 member countries agreed to, quote, considerably increase defense spending.
Considerably increase, and they put a number on it.
They did. A new financial goal, aiming for 5% of GDP by 2035.
5%. That's a massive jump from the current 2% target for many.
It is, and it's specifically broken down. 3.5% for what they call direct defense, so troops, armaments, systems, and 1.5% for infrastructure and cybersecurity.
And it's impossible not to see the shadow of former President Trump here. This decision, it partially aligns with years of pressure from him regarding defense commitments, right?
Unquestionably. His influence was definitely felt.
And speaking of Trump, he was actually there. He was asked about collective defense, Article 5 specifically.
Yeah.
The cornerstone of NATO.
The attack on one is an attack on all principle.
Exactly. And his response?
He said, quote, I'm with it. That's why I'm here.
Okay. Which was apparently a, quote, relief for some allies after some of his previous, more ambiguous declarations about NATO's value.
Relief, yes. But not everything was quite so aligned at the summit.
Ah, right. French President Macron had some sharp words.
He did. He pointed out what he called a contradiction. He said, and this is a direct quote, cannot come here as an ally, demand we spend more on NATO defenses, and at the same time impose import tariffs. This is an aberration.
An aberration. Strong language. And that's clearly aimed at Trump's threats of commercial war.
Precisely. It highlights this tension for European nations who are facing significant economic pressures at home while trying to justify these big increases in military spending.
And the NATO Secretary General, Marco Ruttner, he acknowledged this difficulty.
He did. Ruttner acknowledged it's tough for European countries and Canada to find these extra resources, but he affirmed it's necessary given the, quote, Russian threat and the current security situation. His line was that NATO would emerge stronger, fairer, and more lethal.
Stronger, fairer, and more lethal.
Fair.
But there were nuances even within the agreement, like Spain's position.
Yes. Spain, while endorsing the 5% goal in principle, also, quote, declared that it does not need to achieve it exactly in the established molds.
Hinting at other ways to contribute, perhaps, like capabilities or participation in missions.
That seems to be the implication, yes. Other forms of contribution beyond just hitting that specific percentage number.
So what's particularly striking here is this internal dynamic. It shows a NATO that's, united by a threat, but still wrestling with national interests?
I think that's exactly right. It's simultaneously united by this common perceived threat from Russia, but it's still grappling with these deep-seated national interests, economic realities, and frankly, the volatile influence of key political figures like Trump.
Yeah.
The push for increased spending is undeniable now, but how different members will actually achieve it and what political or economic trade-offs that might require, that remains a really complex and ongoing challenge.
And speaking of key players, Ukrainian President Zelensky was also present in The Hague.
He was, though interestingly, he wasn't invited to the main summit meeting itself.
Right. But he did attend a pre-summit dinner with the King of the Netherlands.
Yes, and crucially, he had a private meeting with Trump.
Ah, okay. And what came out of that meeting?
Well, reports suggest that meeting included a Ukrainian wish list, essentially requests for more armaments.
More weapons? But did Trump give any indication he'd reverse the hold on aid?
Apparently not. The reporting says Trump has not given signs of resuming arms shipments that were previously approved under the Biden presidency. So that point remains, open, uncertain.
Which leads to this fascinating point about visual diplomacy. Zelensky's clothes.
Yes. It's a curious detail, but potentially quite significant, instead of his usual military-style T-shirts.
The olive green ones we're used to seeing.
Exactly. He's recently opted for black jackets and collared shirts, but without ties.
Okay. And there's analysis suggesting this is deliberate.
Yes. According to Ukrainia, which is a prominent Ukrainian defense and diplomacy journal, this is seen as a form of symbolic communication.
Symbolic communication. How so?
The idea is it aims to project seriousness, maintain a clear link with the military through the dark colors, perhaps, but crucially to not provoke international partners, maybe appear more statesmanlike, less purely martial.
Balancing the wartime leader image with the diplomat seeking aid. That's quite nuanced.
It really is a calculated visual shift.
And how did Russia react to all this NATO activity? Predictably, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely predictably. They accused NATO of following a path of, quote, unbridled militarization.
Unbridled militarization.
Yes, and described NATO as a demon from hell needed to justify this increased defense spending.
Wow. Demon from hell.
Wow.
That's vivid.
It fits their long-standing rhetoric, of course, that the West is the one provoking and prolonging the conflict.
So when you look at this whole picture, Trump's rhetoric, Macron's pushback, Zelensky's calculated visual diplomacy, Russia's reaction about what does this NATO summit really tell us about the alliance's underlying condition? Is it fragile or maybe surprisingly resilient?
That's the critical question, isn't it? What stands out to me is how the summit exposed NATO as this entity really in flux. It's united, yes, by that common threat perception, but it's clearly still grappling with those national interests we talked about, the economic strains, and the sheer unpredictability brought by figures like Trump. The spending push is real, but the path to achieving it and the potential internal fractures along the way, that's the space to watch. It shows both fragility and a certain kind of adaptive resilience, perhaps.
A complex picture. And as we consider these shifting alliances and battlefields, it's impossible to ignore another critical region facing its own very complex narratives, Iran's nuclear program.
Right. And here, too, we have conflicting accounts, especially involving former President Trump.
He's repeatedly claimed to have, quote, destroyed or obliterated it, hasn't it?
He has used that very strong language. Yet, a preliminary assessment from the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, part of the U.S. government, paints a very different picture.
Okay. What did the DIA assessment suggest?
Well, sources linked to that report stated the recent attack, presumably the Israeli one, quote, sealed accesses but did not destroy the underground bunkers.
Sealed accesses but didn't destroy the bunkers and the centrifuges.
Crucially, some centrifuges were reportedly still intact, and the estimated delay to Iran's program was maybe only 1 or 2 months.
Only 1 or 2 months. That's a world away from obliterated.
It certainly is. And what's truly striking is that the White House reportedly reacted quickly, calling the DIA assessment completely wrong.
The White House contradicting its own intelligence agency.
Directly, yes. And interestingly, if you look at the language the U.S. used at the UN Security Council around that time, it was more contained. They said the program was degraded, not obliterated.
Degraded versus obliterated.
Yeah.
A significant difference in terminology.
Very significant difference. And it's just not common for a president or the White House to so publicly contradict a report from their own intelligence community like that.
So where did Trump get his information, the basis for the obliterated claim?
Well, the source cited in the reporting we looked at suggests the information Trump published actually came from a, quote, institución extranjera, a foreign institution, specifically the Israeli nuclear agency.
From Israel. Okay, that adds another layer of complexity regarding intelligence sharing and, well, public statements in such a sensitive area.
Absolutely. And then you had the narrative battle after the attack, after what was implied as a kind of truce announced by Trump.
Both sides claiming victory, right?
Classic move. Both Iran and Israel declared victory. Netanyahu claimed the attack, quote, removed the threat of nuclear annihilation.
Okay. And Iran.
The Iranian military command declared that Israel and the U.S., quote, should learn lessons from the blows suffered. So yes, a perfect example of the who won narrative playing out.
Each side framing it for their own audience, presumably.
That's the crucial takeaway here, I think. How these narratives are meticulously crafted in geopolitical conflicts. It's often for domestic consumption or to send specific signals to adversaries, regardless of the granular facts on the ground.
Right. When both sides declare victory, it tells you more about their internal political needs, maybe, than the objective military outcome. And here's another sort of unexpected twist involving Trump and Iran. His statement about China buying Iranian oil.
Yes, on social media. He stated that, quote, China now can continue buying oil from Iran.
Which immediately generated doubts, as the source put it, about a possible change in U.S. sanctions policy, right?
Right.
Because sanctions are supposed to prevent that.
Exactly. It caused quite a stir. A White House spokesperson had to quickly clarify that this, quote, does not represent a loosening of sanctions.
So what was Trump's intention then, according to the White House?
Apparently, the intention was to highlight that Iran didn't block the Strait of Hormuz during the confrontation.
Ah, okay. So by not blocking the strait, Iran was thereby, quote, facilitating things for China by resolving a situation that could have directly hurt Chinese oil imports.
That was the clarification offered, yes. That he wasn't greenlighting oil sales, just noting the strait remained open, which benefited China, among others.
But despite that clarification, words have consequences, especially in markets.
Oh, absolutely. That initial phrase from Trump, even before the clarification, had an immediate impact. The price of oil reportedly fell almost 6%.
6%, that's a big drop.
It is. And stock markets reacted with a rise. The signal the market took was essentially a decreased risk of interruption in energy supply from the Gulf.
So what does this whole episode tell us about the power of, well, presidential tweets or statements, even if they're later walked back or clarified?
I think it highlights a really crucial aspect of modern geopolitics, and maybe finance too. How a single statement, even an ambiguous one, from a key figure like a U.S. president, can instantly ripple through global markets.
Yeah.
It shows just how deeply intertwined political rhetoric is with economic stability, especially in sensitive sectors like energy. Investor confidence can shift dramatically based purely on perceived geopolitical risk, which is often shaped by these kinds of statements. It underscores the interconnectedness of policy, perception, and global finance.
Policy, perception, and finance. That's a good way to put it. And while all this high-stakes drama was unfolding, NATO, Trump, Iran, Israel, it's critical, absolutely critical, to remember what was still happening elsewhere.
You mean in Gaza?
Exactly. The war with Hamas in Gaza just continued relentlessly with devastating effects, even while the world's attention was largely focused on the Persian Gulf.
The human cost there has just been immense, and it didn't pause. On Tuesday, for instance, 7 Israeli soldiers died in a single attack in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza.
7 soldiers in one day.
Yes, it was described as the deadliest day for the Israeli army in the territory since the ceasefire with Hamas was broken back in March.
And Hamas claimed responsibility.
Yes, the military wing of Hamas claimed authorship. They stated they used an explosive against an armored vehicle and then followed up with an anti-tank missile against the reinforcements that arrived.
A deadly ambush. And significantly, we're also seeing signs of internal debate within Israel about the war.
That's right. And this felt quite significant. A parliament member named Mordvny, who is actually from one of Netanyahu's own coalition parties.
From within the government's base.
Exactly. He publicly questioned the situation. He asked point blank, I still don't understand why we are fighting in Gaza. For what?
For what? Coming from inside the coalition? That's quite a statement.
It really is. And what we might be seeing here, particularly with a statement like that coming from, quote, the government's base, is an indication of internal fatigue and potentially increasing pressure for a more lasting ceasefire from within Israel itself. It suggests the debate is moving beyond just external pressures and becoming a significant internal political issue.
A growing internal debate about the conflict's purpose and its sustainability.
Precisely.
And meanwhile, the humanitarian toll on Palestinians during this period.
Yeah.
It's just staggering when you see the numbers.
It's grim. The source noted that more than 800 Palestinians were killed in Gaza just during that period when the world's primary focus was elsewhere on Israel's situation.
800 people.
And in just the last 24 hours, covered by the report, 74 people died. Tragically, 33 of those were killed in a location where humanitarian aid was actually being distributed.
At an aid distribution point? Oh, that's horrific.
It is. And we also know, sadly, that a journalist was confirmed among the dead in that recent period.
So the broader implication here is just the stark reality that these humanitarian crises, they grind on, often outside the main glare of the global spotlight, right?
Absolutely. Even as global attention shifts rapidly between different geopolitical flashpoints, Iran one week, maybe something else the next, the suffering in places like Gaza continues. It's a really sobering reminder of the perhaps selective nature of global attention spans and the isolated reality for those caught in conflict when the cameras turn away.
It really is. We've certainly covered a lot of ground today. from, the active kinetic conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza to the shifting alliances and spending debates within NATO.
The complex politics of information surrounding Iran's nuclear program, those conflicting narratives we discussed.
Right. And underpinning all of it, the undeniable ongoing human cost in all these situations.
I think a key takeaway here, if there's one thread connecting all this, is just how interconnected all these events truly are.
Yeah.
A drone strike in Ukraine isn't isolated. A defense spending target agreed upon in The Hague isn't just about budgets. A president's off-the-cuff remark about oil exports. Each one has a ripple effect. They shape the global landscape in real time, often in ways that, aren't immediately obvious if you only look at the single headline.
That's a great point. So what does this all mean for you, our listener? We leave you with this thought. In an age where information is absolutely constant, but clarity often feels scarce, what does it truly mean to be well-informed about these incredibly fast-moving global events?
And maybe, how do you discern what really matters amidst all the conflicting reports, the political rhetoric, the noise?
It's definitely a question worth pondering as you navigate the news in the days ahead.